The wind howled through the canyon like a wounded animal. Rain fell in sheets, slicing through the bitter cold, while jagged bolts of lightning lit up the sky in a chaotic rhythm. The world was drenched in silver and shadow, and through that storm, a lone Mustang stumbled forward, his legs trembling beneath him. He was a ghost of the powerful creature he once was, ribs stark against soaked skin, a gash running down his flank, his breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. He had been running for hours. From what, even he no longer knew exactly. Men, traps, wolves, it didn't matter anymore. The wild was no longer safe, and neither was the silence. It was as if the land had turned against him. Each step he took echoed with the sound of survival, his hooves splashing in the mud, slipping on rocks as the narrow trail curled around a sharp drop into the ravine. The Mustang's name had never been spoken aloud by any human, yet if he had one, it would have been earned, not given. He had once led a small band of wild horses across these hills, fierce and untouchable. But tonight, he was alone. Something had gone terribly wrong. And now, with the storm pressing down and the forest turning into a roaring sea of trees, he had no destination, only the will to keep moving forward. Something primal in his heart refused to let go. A crack of thunder split the sky as his back leg gave out. He crumpled to his knees, the sudden jolt making him cry out, a sound that was part pain, part protest. For a moment, he didn't move. Mud clung to his mane, caking around the wound on his side. He blinked slowly, the light fading from his eyes. Somewhere above the wind and rain, the distant howl of wolves echoed. The sound stirred something inside him. His ears flicked toward the noise. His head lifted an inch, nostrils flaring as the unmistakable scent of danger crept through the wet air. The wolves had been trailing him for miles, careful and patient, knowing the storm would weaken him more than their teeth ever could. They were near now, emboldened by his collapse. The Mustang struggled to his feet, legs quivering like saplings in the wind. He turned his head toward the dark line of trees where glowing eyes flickered. His breath formed thick clouds, warm life against the bitter cold. For the first time, his fear was visible, not as panic but as a flicker in his stance, a falter in his strength. The wolves stepped out of the brush. 3 of them, lean and sharp with hunger, their eyes locked on their prize. They moved with the ease of predators certain of their victory. But the Mustang didn't run. He couldn't. He lowered his head, front leg stomping once into the mud. He was weak, but not yet defeated. Miles away, tucked deep in the shelter of towering pines, an old woman sat on her cabin's front steps. A battered oil lamp flickered beside her. Rain pelted the tin roof above, the wind slapping branches against the windows. Yet she didn't flinch. Her name was Lena. She sat wrapped in a heavy coat, her graying hair damp and stuck to her cheeks. A large dog lay at her feet, head resting on crossed paws, eyes watchful even in rest. Ranger, her only companion for years. Lena stared out into the storm, eyes narrowed with unease. Something gnawed at her chest, instinct, perhaps, or memory. She'd lived in this wilderness long enough to feel when something was wrong. She lifted the old pair of binoculars hanging from a nail beside the door and scanned the distant ridgeline. Lightning split the sky again, and in that brief second of clarity she saw movement, something collapsing near the edge of the canyon. She lowered the binoculars slowly. Her knuckles were white around them. She didn't need to know exactly what she saw. She knew enough. Lena stood, stiff from years of silence and solitude. She moved with purpose now, stepping into the cabin and pulling on her boot. The dog rose too, his body language alert. He knew that look in her eyes. It had been a long time since she'd gone out in the storm for anything. But this was different. She strapped on her pack, first aid supplies, a flare gun, and the old revolver she hadn't touched in months. Ranger whined as she slung it over her shoulder. "Quiet, boy," she muttered, but not harshly. Her voice cracked like it hadn't been used all day. "We might be too late, but I won't sit here and do nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the gate and mounted her old mare, Hazel, who stood calmly in the paddock despite the storm. She hadn't ridden in months, maybe longer, but urgency dissolved the years between who she was now and the woman she used to be. A woman who had once driven through snow to save a dying foal. A woman who had once believed in second chances. She rode hard, following no trail but the ones carved into her bones by years in the wild. Ranger ran ahead, a blur of motion and muscle. Lightning lit the path in brief flashes, each one revealing a landscape soaked in chaos. Trees leaned in the wind, roots exposed, water rushing in fast-growing streams that hadn't existed hours before. By the time she reached the canyon's edge, the wolves had formed a loose circle around the Mustang. He stood in the center, head low, sides heaving, defiant despite the odds. The sight of him hit Lena in the chest. He was beautiful, even in ruin. Something about the way he stood reminded her of a time long gone, a stallion she'd once treated when she was young, still working in the city. That horse had fought for life too. But this one was different. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting because he refused to surrender. Lena raised her flare gun and fired into the sky. The red blaze hissed as it soared, lighting the scene in a fiery glow. The wolves recoiled, startled by the sudden burst of light and sound. One growled, stepping forward, but then Ranger charged, teeth bared. Chaos exploded. Ranger drove the wolves back, barking fiercely, darting between them and the Mustang. Lena dismounted, grabbing a branch and swinging it to keep the wolves at bay. The storm roared around them, but she barely noticed. Her focus was absolute. "Get back!" she shouted, the force in her voice surprising even herself. The wolves finally scattered, retreating into the darkness. Their silhouettes melted into the forest, leaving only silence behind. The Mustang remained frozen, eyes wide, his entire body trembling. Lena approached slowly, carefully. "Easy," she whispered, holding out her hand. "I'm not here to hurt you." The horse didn't move, but his ears flicked forward. Blood trickled down his leg, mixing with the mud. She stepped closer, letting him see her, smell her. Ranger stood behind her now, breathing hard, his side scratched but not seriously hurt. "I'm going to help you," she said, more to herself than the animal. The Mustang let out a low, rasping breath. For a moment nothing moved. Then, as if some unseen force gave permission, the horse's head dropped a little. Not in surrender, never that. But in something close to trust. Lena exhaled. She could work with that. The storm showed no sign of ending. Trees groaned, wind howled, and Lena knew they wouldn't make it back to the cabin tonight. Not like this. The horse could barely stand, and she didn't have the strength to lead both him and her mare through the ravaged woods. She would have to stay. She scanned the area and spotted a slight overhang in the rocks, half hidden by a leaning pine. It wasn't shelter, not really, but it would have to do. She began leading the horse, inch by inch, with Ranger circling protectively. They reached the overhang, and she set down her pack, pulling out what bandages she had. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. She worked in silence, the only sounds the wind, the crackle of the remaining flare in the mud, and the slow, rhythmic breath of the Mustang as he lay down, finally, as if he knew he could. Lena sat beside him, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. Ranger curled up against the horse's side, warming him with his body. She watched them, a strange ache forming in her chest. It had been years since she'd felt anything other than numb. Outside, the storm raged on. But under that fragile shelter, something had changed. A beginning had been carved out of the chaos. And neither of them, horse, woman, or dog, would be the same after tonight. Morning came slowly. The storm had passed in the night, but its damage lingered. The forest was hushed, as if still stunned by its own fury. Trees bent under the weight of rain, and small rivulets of water trickled through grooves freshly carved into the earth. The light was pale, filtered through mist and fog that clung to the ground like a secret. Every leaf glistened, and the air smelled clean, raw, and unfamiliar. Lena opened her eyes with a groan, her back aching from the cold ground and awkward position. Her coat was soaked through, her limbs stiff. Ranger was already awake, standing guard at the edge of the overhang, ears perked and body alert. But what drew her gaze immediately was the horse. The Mustang lay just feet from her, his breathing shallow but steady. Mud clung to his side where blood had dried into a dark smear. In the gray morning light, his injuries looked worse, angry and inflamed, but he was alive. That mattered more than anything. Lena pulled herself up, wincing. "Still with us?" she muttered. The Mustang flicked one ear in response but did not move. She knelt beside him again, checking the wound along his flank. It was jagged, likely torn by a barbed wire or a sharp rock, and it would need proper cleaning and stitching. She didn't have the supplies out here, not enough anyway. They had to get back to the cabin. She hesitated, resting her hand gently on his shoulder. The muscle beneath twitched, tense but not resistant. She studied his face, so much strength, even in stillness. His eye met hers, not wide with fear now, but searching. "You let me help you last night," she whispered. "That means something. Now I need you to trust me a little more." It took nearly 2 hours just to get him on his feet. Lena didn't rush him. She offered small bits of dried apple from her pack, talked to him in low, even tones and let Ranger remain close. The dog's presence, curiously enough, seemed to calm the Mustang more than her voice. As if the wild trusted the wild more than it did any human. When the horse finally stood, it was a shaky, uncertain rise. His back leg favored the ground, barely touching it. He wouldn't be able to walk far, not like this. But he stood, and that was a triumph in itself. They started back slowly. Hazel carried Lena, but only because she needed to conserve her energy. She led the Mustang by a rope fashioned loosely from a piece of canvas. She didn't tie it tight. He could have pulled away at any moment. But he didn't. Each step was painstaking. The trail they had taken the night before was washed out, turned to slippery muck and fallen branches. But Lena knew the woods. She cut a new path, winding carefully along the higher ground, avoiding gullies and unstable slope. Ranger scouted ahead, returning often to check on them, as if he too sensed the fragility of their strange new herd. Several times, the Mustang stumbled and paused, sides heaving. But he didn't collapse. Lena marveled at that. So much strength in such a broken body. She found herself talking more as they walked, about the woods, about Hazel and Ranger, even about the cabin that lay still hours ahead. He listened, she imagined. Or maybe she just needed to hear herself. It had been so long since her voice had shared space with someone who might truly need it. By mid-afternoon, they reached the edge of the clearing where her cabin stood. The modest log home looked weather-beaten but strong, its roof patched with metal sheeting and moss, its porch leaning slightly to one side. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, but it looked safe, solid. A place of recovery, not comfort. The Mustang hesitated at the edge of the trees, nostrils flaring. His body went rigid, sensing the change from wilderness to human space. Lena turned in the saddle and met his eye. "I know it's not your kind of place," she said gently, "but I swear nothing in there will harm you." He didn't move. Ranger returned, standing between them and the cabin, tail wagging slightly, ears relaxed. It was enough. After a long pause, the horse stepped forward. Inside, Lena moved quickly. She cleared space in the old barn beside the house, a rough structure, more lean-to than stable, but dry and quiet. Hazel was left to graze in the small paddock while Lena guided the Mustang to the makeshift stall. He limped in without resistance, his head low but his eyes still watchful. She worked with practiced hands. She cleaned the wound with warm water and soap, flinching slightly when he jerked from the sting. She stitched carefully, every tug of the thread a whisper of pain, and every completed line a promise. He didn't fight her. Not once. As if some deep instinct told him this pain would pass, and something better would follow. After, she wrapped the leg and laid clean straw beneath him. He lay down with a soft grunt, finally letting himself rest. She sat beside him again that night, watching his sides rise and fall. Her own exhaustion weighed heavy, but her mind wouldn't quiet. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "What chased you down like that? You don't look like the kind that breaks easy." The only answer was silence and the soft creak of trees swaying outside. But something stirred inside her, an old ache, something half-healed. She hadn't always lived out here alone. Years ago, before the forest became her only company, Lena had been someone else. A vet in a small town, a wife, a mother. But grief had a way of changing everything. One accident, one phone call, and everything she loved had been ripped away. Her husband gone. Her son, a passenger in the wrong car at the wrong time. After that, cities felt like cages. People, like ghosts she couldn't bear to walk among. So she came here. To the edge of nowhere. To be swallowed by silence. But now the silence had been broken. Over the following days the horse, whom Lena began calling Storm, half as a joke and half as a tribute to the night they'd found each other, began to heal. Slowly. He still limped, still carried his scars, but he no longer trembled when she approached. He took apples from her hand. He let her brush his tangled mane. And sometimes, when the wind was quiet and the sun poured golden light through the trees, she'd find him watching her. Not out of fear, but with something close to curiosity. Ranger, for his part, had claimed Storm as kin. The dog slept beside the stall at night and chased off curious raccoons in the morning. The two creatures, both survivors in their own right, seemed bound by something Lena couldn't quite name. One afternoon, as Lena sat on the porch, watching clouds drift over the ridge, she realized something strange. She didn't feel alone. Not in the way she used to. There was breath in the barn, life in the air. A rhythm had returned to her days. And while she didn't dare believe in healing yet, she believed in the effort. But Storm wasn't a pet. And she knew that. He belonged to the wild, to the wind and the endless hills. This place was a stop along his road, not the end of it. And as he grew stronger, that truth grew louder in her chest. She could keep him safe for now. But not forever. Still, she wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. That night, a sharp knock startled her from sleep. It wasn't the door, it was sound from the woods. A branch snapped. Then another. Ranger leapt up, growling low, ears pointed toward the trees. Lena reached for her flashlight and coat, heart thumping. Storm stirred in the barn. She stepped onto the porch, scanning the edge of the forest. Nothing but darkness. Then, movement. Lena didn't move. Neither did the man. The only sound was Ranger's low growl vibrating through the night air. Storm remained still, though his ears flicked toward the clearing as if he, too, recognized something unnatural in the way the figure approached. The stranger stepped closer, his boots squelching softly in the wet grass, the weight on his back shifting, a limp foal, its head hanging, legs dangling awkwardly like a broken marionette. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the man called softly, his voice hoarse, cracked with fatigue. "I found him caught in a trap. Don't got anywhere else to go." Lena squinted. He was younger than she first thought, mid-30s maybe, but weathered. Mud streaked his face, and blood crusted along one arm where his sleeve had been torn away. But his eyes were sharp, aware. Haunted. She stepped forward cautiously, lowering her flashlight beam. "Bring him to the barn." Slowly. The man nodded once and crossed the rest of the clearing with quiet reverence, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace that hung between them. Lena opened the side gate and guided him inside, her pulse quickening when she saw Storm rise to his feet at the sound of their footsteps. The stallion didn't charge, didn't retreat. He watched. The foal was small, too small. Malnourished, shivering violently despite the layers of wool draped over him. His front leg had been torn badly, the wound raw and angry. Trapped in barbed wire, no doubt. Lena cursed under her breath. "I've got him," she said, already clearing space on the straw as the man gently laid the foal down. "You sit." He obeyed, collapsing onto an overturned feed bucket, his body sagging like he hadn't sat in days. Lena moved with focus, hands deft and practiced. She cleaned the wound, ignoring the way the foal flinched and whimpered. There wasn't time to be gentle. Infection had already set in. Ranger sat close, eyes on the man, not hostile but watchful. Lena worked silently until she finished wrapping the foal's leg and covered him with a dry blanket. Then she turned, finally allowing herself to breathe. "You didn't say your name." The man looked up, wiping his face with a shaky hand. "Garrett. Garrett Reeves. Used to run cattle up north before the fires came through. Been riding fence and trying to keep the last of the herd together since." He swallowed hard. "Most didn't make it. And the foal strayed from a Mustang band that passed through last week. I saw him limping, tried to catch up, but he didn't keep pace. Found him tangled up 2 days later." Lena looked back at the foal. His breathing was shallow, labored, but steady. "You carried him all the way here?" "Didn't know you were here," Garrett admitted. "Was following smoke. Figured someone had a fire going out this way. Took a chance." Lena leaned against the stall wall, arms crossed. She studied him for a moment, unsure whether to trust him. But then she glanced at Storm, who had crept closer, now standing near the foal's head, nose twitching gently as he sniffed the young one's mane. "He's one of yours?" Garrett asked softly. "No," Lena said. "He found me. Or maybe I found him. Doesn't matter now." The barn settled into a strange, uneasy quiet. Garrett leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on Storm. "Never seen one that calm. Not with strangers around." "He's not tame," Lena said. "But he knows pain. And survival. That has a way of changing how you see the world." Garrett looked up sharply at that. "Yeah. I guess it does." In the hours that followed, Lena kept vigil by the foal's side. She didn't ask Garrett to leave. And he didn't push for comfort. They moved around each other carefully, two strangers tangled in something bigger than either of them fully understood. The weight of pasts they didn't speak about hung thick in the air. Storm didn't leave the foal's side. He stood sentinel, occasionally lowering his head to nuzzle the blanket as if willing the small horse to stay tethered to life. By morning, the foal stirred. It wasn't much. Just a twitch of one ear, a shift of breath, but it was enough to crack the fear that had settled like frost. Lena smiled barely. Garrett noticed. "He's still got a fight in him. Let's hope it's enough." Lena handed Garrett a mug of tea as they sat on the porch later that day, both too tired to speak much. Ranger lay between them, content. The forest was alive with the soft hum of spring returning. "Funny," Garrett said after a long pause. "I spent years thinking the world owed me something. After the fires, the losses, I was angry. At everything. At nothing." Lena sipped her tea, eyes fixed on the tree line. "Grief burns everything down. Leaves you standing in ashes. Sometimes it's easier to stay there than to rebuild." He looked at her then. "You lost someone too?" She nodded, but said nothing more. Garrett didn't press. Instead, he pointed toward the barn. "That Mustang, he's something else. He didn't just protect the foal. He guided him. Even hurt, even scared. He led him somewhere safe." Lena turned to look at Storm, now grazing calmly in the paddock with Hazel. "He reminded me that strength isn't always about running fast or fighting hard," she said. "Sometimes it's just about staying. Surviving. Letting someone help." Garrett leaned back. "Think he'll go back to the wild?" She nodded slowly. "Eventually. He's healing. Every day, he gets a little stronger. But I can't keep him. Not forever. He doesn't belong to anyone." He was quiet a moment. "Maybe none of us do. Maybe we're all just passing through, finding each other in the wreckage, holding on for as long as we can." The next few days passed in a blur of recovery. The foal, whom Garrett started calling Ash, grew stronger under their care. He nibbled at hay, walked with a limp, but brightened with each sunrise. Storm watched over him without fail, never straying far, never letting the young one feel alone. Lena noticed something shifting in Garrett too. The lines on his face began to soften. He laughed once, just a quiet chuckle at something Ranger did, and Lena realized it was the first laughter she'd heard in a very long time. He helped fix the sagging porch rail, repaired the fencing, chopped firewood without being asked. Each night they sat on the steps together, saying little but sharing everything that couldn't be spoken. A rhythm formed, a strange, fragile harmony among the unlikely herd they had become. But deep down, Lena knew it couldn't last. Storm's eyes were beginning to change. The sadness that once anchored him had started to lift. He moved with grace again. He began pacing near the treeline at dusk, ears tuned to distant calls. The wild was calling him back. Not urgently, but steadily. And Garrett, he had miles to go. Ranchers still out there trying to rebuild. Animals left behind. Fires that left scars not just on the land but in the souls of the people who survived them. On the fifth morning, Lena found Garrett saddling his horse. He looked up, his expression soft. "Didn't want to wake you." She stepped into the clearing. "You don't have to go." He hesitated. "I do. There's a herd east of here. They'll need help moving before the rains come again. And I think it's time." She nodded. "Will you come back?" Garrett gave a small, tired smile. "If I do, will you still be here?" "I think so," she said. "For a while, at least." They stood like that, saying. Storm didn't leave that day. Nor the next. He stood near the open gate, muscles tense, as though something held him back, something invisible, yet powerful. Lena watched him from the porch, her heart torn between hope and heartache. She'd expected him to disappear into the forest the moment he was strong enough. But he lingered, caught between the wild and the small piece of peace he had found here. Ash the foal was recovering quickly. His limp was still present, but his appetite had returned with vigor. Every day he grew bolder, even playful. Storm remained his protector, guiding him with gentle nudges, nipping at his legs when he tried to overexert himself, resting beside him in the shade during hot afternoons. Their bond was undeniable. Lena had seen many horses over the years, but nothing like the way these two moved in harmony, as if Storm had become something more than just a guardian. He was a mentor, a father, a lifeline. Still, Storm's gaze often drifted to the forest. On the seventh evening since Garrett's departure, a distant rumble of hooves echoed through the valley. Lena stood up sharply, heart racing. At first, she thought it was thunder. But no, the sky was clear. The sound was deeper, more rhythmic. Horses. Storm perked up, ears twitching. He stepped forward, muscles alert, nostrils flaring. A low sound, somewhere between a grunt and a whinny, escaped his throat. Lena climbed to the top of the pasture hill and squinted into the horizon. Then she saw them. A herd of Mustangs emerging from the edge of the forest, their manes flying like dark ribbons in the golden light. There were at least 20 of them, moving as one, powerful, untamed, beautiful. They slowed as they reached the clearing below, then stopped altogether, heads high, eyes scanning. Storm's body trembled, not from fear but recognition. He took a step forward. Then another. Ash stood behind him, confused, letting out a soft bleat. But Storm didn't turn back. Lena's chest tightened. She knew this moment had been coming, yet still, it hurt in a way she hadn't anticipated. Storm approached the fence line slowly, almost cautiously. The lead mare, a striking palomino with a jagged scar across her flank, stepped forward. The two touched noses, briefly, reverently, and then Storm stepped away from the paddock. He didn't bolt. He didn't look back. He just walked, as though every step carried the weight of something final. Ash let out a shrill whinny and tried to follow, his tiny legs scrambling through the straw, but he faltered at the fence line. He was still too weak. Still too tethered to safety. Storm stopped and turned. The entire herd watched him. He walked back. Lena held her breath. She watched him approach Ash again, nuzzling the foal's mane with a strange tenderness. Then, Storm looked toward Lena. For the first time, she swore she saw something behind his eyes. Not a plea. Not a goodbye. A question. She stepped down the hill, unlatched the paddock gate once more, and whispered, "Go, if you must. But you don't have to go alone." The herd began to move again, circling, restless. Storm nudged Ash once more. The foal whinnied but didn't follow. Then Storm did something Lena didn't expect. He lay down. He curled his large body beside Ash and waited, as if telling the wild to wait too. As if saying, "Not yet." By morning, the herd was gone. Storm remained beside Ash, and Lena knew then that whatever storm had raged inside him, it had settled, for now. He wasn't ready to return. Not until Ash was ready to. The weeks passed gently. Summer blossomed in the valley, and with it came life, greener pastures, warmer winds, and a rhythm of healing that touched every creature within Lena's small sanctuary. Garrett returned near the start of June, dust-covered and sunburnt but alive. Ranger barked madly when he saw Lena, leaping into her arms, tail wagging so furiously that he nearly toppled her over. Garrett dismounted and simply said, "I brought something." Lena raised a brow. He turned to his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle, a faded, torn photograph tucked into a leather wallet. He handed it to her. "This is my father," he said quietly. "And this was his mare. She saved his life in the flood of '89. Stood chest-deep in the river, refused to move without him. He never stopped talking about her." Lena studied the picture. A tall, stern man stood beside a striking black mare, both soaked and mud-covered, but alive. She handed it back. "He would have liked you," Garrett said. "You both understand things most people miss." She smiled faintly. "Like when to let go, and when to hold on." He nodded. "Exactly." Garrett stayed longer this time. Helped reinforce the shelter, build a new fence for the far paddock, and trained Ash to wear a halter. The foal had grown stronger, steadier. No longer the fragile, injured thing that stumbled into their lives, he was now spirited, stubborn, and fierce. But Storm still stood beside him every night. Lena sometimes wondered if Storm had found in Ash a piece of himself that had been lost long ago. Then one morning, just before the heat of July settled in, Lena awoke to an eerie silence. The paddock was empty. No Storm. No Ash. Just hoof prints in the dew, leading beyond the fence, down into the valley, and into the wild. She stood for a long time, staring at the tree-line, listening. A single bird chirped somewhere in the distance. Wind rustled the tall grass. And that was all. Garrett joined her quietly. He said nothing at first. Then, gently, "They were ready." She nodded. "I know. But it still hurts." "It does." They stood side by side as the morning sun climbed higher. Lena thought about how some stories didn't need words to be told. How some journeys, like Storm's, were quiet, steady, and full of grace. He had come to her broken, wounded in more than just body. She hadn't healed him. Not completely, but she had given him something to stand on until he could run again. And when he left, he didn't go alone. He took with him a legacy. A life he had saved. That night, they lit a fire in the yard. Garrett played soft music from an old radio, and Ranger dozed at Lena's feet. They shared a quiet meal and a bottle of wine left over from the winter. "I keep thinking about that moment," Garrett said eventually. "When Storm could have left, but didn't. He chose to stay. Because of Ash? Maybe. Or maybe he saw something here, something worth staying for." Lena didn't answer right away. She looked out into the night and let her thoughts drift. "Sometimes," she said finally, "survival isn't just about escaping. It's about connection. Trust. Love." Garrett looked at her. "You sound like someone who knows." "I do." He reached for her hand, fingers brushing lightly against hers. And she didn't pull away. In the weeks that followed, Lena expanded the shelter. New horses arrived, rescues from auctions, strays from trails, once abused animals who needed someone to believe in them again. She took them all in. Storm and Ash didn't return, but sometimes, on moonlit nights, she would hear the faint echo of hooves on the ridge. A sound so distant it felt like a dream. And she smiled. Because she knew. Out there, beyond the forest, two wild spirits ran side by side. One who had once been lost. And one who had come to rescue him.